Well, welcome to the King County Recovery Conversations podcast. My name is Carolyn Presnell, and I am your podcast host today. I am here with my friend Melissa McKee, who is graciously joined to agree me in a conversation. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Carolyn.
Hi. I want to first start off by saying we are in a new location. We are at the Temple of the Trees studio out in South Seattle. Dynamite space. Super glad to be here. I love the mojo here. It's one of my favorite things. And so, let's just get started. Melissa, why don't we start off with, how it is that you come to be sitting in the seat with us today?
What a great starting point. And starting points are so important, right? And so I think that actually lends itself to talk about our starting point, where you and I met, which was under some very different circumstances. I was thinking actually on my drive up today from Olympia about how when you and I met inside the Washington Correction Center for Women, where we were both residents, and how we connected so fast and so furious. Yeah. And in that time, we found a path to share experience, strength, and hope in which we both were full of. And in order to make that happen, it was a wind, sun, shine, snow, whatever it was in the yard. We lived in different units and we battled it. We battled the elements just to share that time and space and hope with one another. Yeah. And that foundation has brought us to this place together. Yeah, it has. It was a pretty, it was one of those things at the very beginning. Prior to the beginning of that penitentiary sentence, there was a prayer that I had, and it was like, God, if you can keep me alive long enough to get me to prison, like I'm done. Yeah. And like, I'll do whatever. Yeah. And, and of course, prayers and intervention sometimes come in the form of King County Corrections. And, sure. And I knew instantly that it was answered prayer. And so it was like, I remembered the petition to the universe. Yeah. And like it reverberates in me today as the truth as it did then. And it was that we were in different units. I wasn't real sure, what my path of kind of recovery was going to look like. Right. I had some resistance as a person who had chronically relapsed. I think it was less resistance and it was more an absence of kind of trust or belief. Sure. That I was going to be able to do it again. And we did. We would cross yards to meet in the rain, and we would sit outside underneath that little shelter in the cold of the winter, and we would read together. And we would pray together. And we would pray together. I just really appreciate that you brought up that fateful prayer, because I have a fateful prayer of my own. And I think it's a good place to like be reminded of. And my life was spinning so far out of control prior to my incarceration. And I served a rather lengthy sentence, not nearly as long as many people that I know, but I was incarcerated for about 11 years. I went in my 20s and I came out just months before my 40th birthday. But I have this really clear recollection of just like striving and trying. And like, I was in such a tangle previous to incarceration, prior to, that there was just no way. There was no one thread I could pull. And I was in this really volatile relationship. And the person that I was with at that time had another charge that he was fighting in court. And this was all prior to incarceration. 6 or 7 months before my incarceration. Yeah. And he, being the egomaniac that he was, took this charge to trial. And the night that the jury went into deliberation, I felt so stuck. I just could not figure out how to extract myself. And so I prayed, which was something that I wasn't really accustomed to at the time. And I prayed that this man would go to prison. And he was acquitted from this charge, and within months, both of us were on our way to prison. And to me, that divine intervention, I also can take back to that moment. I didn't know how, and I didn't know when, but I do actually know when. I didn't know how that had got translated the way that it did, but in reality, I'm grateful. That's not to say that I'm grateful for the Department of Corrections and the experience that I've had in there, but I'm grateful for the intervention that I experienced. Yeah, understood. Let's walk a little bit through the, kind of the first part of your incarceration. Like, what was life like when you landed in the institution? What were some of the things that you were navigating, early on?
Thanks for that question. Early incarceration is a bit of a whirlwind to me. I spent 14 months in the county jail with a little break in between because one of the experiences that I carry is that when I landed in the county jail, within the first few weeks, they administered a pregnancy test, and I found out that I was about 7 weeks pregnant at the time of my arrest. I come from Lewis County, really small county jail, not a lot of women who are incarcerated in that space, and certainly not a lot of women who are incarcerated long-term in that space. And so not knowing what else to do and not feeling like a furlough was possible, I was sent to the Correction Center in Purdy for unsentenced as a contract boarder. And what that looked like is rather than going through the process of receiving and learning the ropes, I landed at the institution and went through an intake process that took a few hours, and then I was walked straight over to the closed custody unit. I was 8 months pregnant at the time, and I was taken up to a second tier, second bunk, or upper bunk with a high violent offender, and that was my introduction to the institution. I didn't learn the ropes going in. I remember within my first few days, I was sitting out in the very small closed custody yard, and I was just trying to figure out where I was and what I was supposed to do. And I was observing my surroundings, and there was a pair of women sitting on a bench not far from me. And apparently I looked their way one or two too many times. One of them looked at me and said, "You are awfully observant." And my reply was, I think you have to be in a place like this. And she said, "No, girl, you better not be in a place like this because your face ain't pregnant." And I was like, oh boy.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I understand that early on. I had a similar, not directed at me, but the very first time I came into the institution, they do kind of the invasive routine that they do for intake. It's, no part of your body is sacred to you anymore once you have a Department of Corrections number. And I, was in my little county grade or my state grades, and I was on my way to Mainline to go eat. And it was, I'm following the line and we're standing in line, and, people are getting food, and I watched this gal walk across Mainline and go pick up those big metal milk containers.
Yeah.
And I thought, she's probably part of the kitchen staff. It didn't really register. And then I watched her turn around, and she's walking and picking up speed. Yeah. And then before I knew it, she had took that thing and swung and hit this other woman with it. And it was the same thing. I was like, oh God, what have I done? Yeah. Like, where am I? And it's like day one in the penitentiary. And I was like, I had a rewrite. And, most of the prison wasn't my experience most of the time. Yeah. But I realized that I was now in an environment that I was unfamiliar with, and that I didn't understand the rules, even as somebody who had been, incarcerated a bunch. So there's a rewrite on culture when you come into an institution. Yeah. So you're pregnant.
So I'm pregnant. I get sent to the correction center, and I go through the final phase of my pregnancy there.
Did you end up in the MOMS program there?
No. I was ineligible for the MOMS program for a number of reasons.
Oh, you were in closed custody.
I was in closed custody. I had a violent charge. And in order to be eligible for that program, you have to have less than 3 years on your sentence. Gotcha. And that was not my case. I was also unsentenced at this point, so totally ineligible for any of those things. So I was at the whims of the medical staff at the Department of Corrections, and I went into labor. It was my fourth child, and so I knew my body. I knew the process.
Yeah.
I knew that the moment that I got to 5-minute contractions, that things were going to move rather quickly.
Yeah, a baby was coming.
Yeah, I knew those things. And when I went to the clinic, they hooked me up to what I know now was a faulty monitor that was not recording my contractions. And so the clinic staff refused to send me to the hospital. And I remember laying in a bed in the clinic, writhing in pain. And a doctor or some medical staff walked by, and he looked in on me and he said, you might want to quiet down. Things will get much worse before they get better. And that always stands out to me. Eventually, they realized that I was not faking labor, and they called for EMS. EMS came. The EMS actually filed a formal complaint against the prison in my case because of how long they kept me. I almost gave birth in that ambulance. And once I got to the hospital, it was straight to a room and I gave birth, which was really, really unfortunate for a person with addiction, because I thought at the end of this, at least there'll be some painkillers to get me through this. But they got me to the hospital so late that wasn't an option. And so I gave birth to my daughter. It was a natural childbirth. They immediately took her away from me, which I didn't understand. I thought as long as I was there, I could be with her. I'd never harmed any of my children. That was not part of my story. And so after maybe my first self-advocation of my life, I convinced DOC to allow me to spend those 24 hours that I was in the hospital with my daughter. And so I just held her. They were like, "Would you like to take a nap?" I said, "No, I'll be right here. Thank you." And then the next day, the transport staff came to get me, and they wrapped a chain around my stomach, and then they cuffed my arms to that chain, and they led me out of that room. And I had to trust that they were going to lead me because I couldn't take my eyes off this baby that was just in that clear hospital bassinet. And I kept my eyes on her as long as I could, and then I couldn't see her anymore. And I do want to fast forward just briefly. I talked about I have 4 children. 2 of them I have not seen since my incarceration. My son,
and that's been how long?
So I went to prison in 2007. So the math there, 18 years. Yeah, 18, 19. Something like that.
Something like that. Yeah.
It's early. I'm not going to do math.
Yeah. 17 years, I think.
Yeah. So, but that baby girl that I held that night, she graduated from high school last week.
Nice job.
She did good.
Yeah.
She did good. And what is so remarkable is that somehow the threads of relationship amongst siblings have either been built or retained, even amongst those that had never met previously. And so for the first time since before my incarceration, last weekend, all 4 of my children were together.
Get out of here.
Yeah, they spent the whole weekend together. They celebrated that little one who's not so little anymore. And even though I couldn't be there, I knew that the thread that held them together was me. I was the one thing that they had in common.
Yeah.
And so good, bad, or indifferent, I was a part of that celebration.
Yeah. Melissa, I, as a mom, I understand kind of relationship with children. Let me go just a little ways. Is one of my questions, when your baby left, when you were taken from your baby at the hospital, did your child go with family?
No. No, there was family who expressed interest. My dad, I know, stepped up with all of my girls, but the state deemed that a single working man
wasn't a viable option for a newborn baby.
Yeah. And so I placed her for adoption. She was picked up by a family that she remained with ever since. And that has been a balm for me to know that she's had that consistency, to know that she is the one child of mine, not to say that she is immune from the trauma that came from the choices that I made. Right. I know that that is not true. However, she didn't have to live them the way that my other children did. And so I've always, that has given me great peace.
Listen. So when I met you, I have a story in my interior. As you as the animal whisperer. As when I met you, you carried dog food in your pockets and you fed it to the crows. And the days you were sad, I think they gave you gifts back. And but I know you as a woman in the dog program, and you had a pretty remarkable experience with that program. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I would love to. When I was in the county jail, I heard that there was a dog program at the institution I was going to end up at. And that was a sliver of hope for me. I knew somehow if I could do that work, I would be okay. And then when I arrived at the institution, I saw that amongst the 900 women that were there were about 15 that worked for this program. And I immediately thought, well, why would I get to be part of that, right? And there were some like behavioral requirements. You had to be major infraction free for a couple of years, and you have to have a certain amount of time left on your sentence. And so at first it was too much for me to just like move toward that thing, you know?
Still trying to navigate who you want to be in prison.
Yeah. Who I get to be or who I can be, what the possibilities were. And also like having to shed some of the things that I carried. Like I did not know how to do any of that. And so it took me some time. It took me some time to meet the behavioral requirements. It took me some time to have an opportunity to take the class that is a prerequisite for being hired. But eventually I got there. And when I did, it did exactly what I knew it would do. And it saved me, quite honestly. So the program is the Prison Prep Partnership Program. It was the first dog training program in the United States. It's a nonprofit organization that operates out of the Washington Corrections Center for Women. And it was started by this nun, Sister Pauline Quinn. And I love this story. Sister Pauline had suffered years of abuse and had been unhoused in the streets of California. And in that experience, she met this dog. I think it was a German Shepherd, but it's likely that I'm wrong. But she met this dog, and through this dog, she learned what she came to call other-centeredness. And in that other-centeredness, everything changed. And she understood that if she could pass that on, and especially to women who had experienced the kinds of traumas that we had experienced and who had made the kinds of mistakes and choices that we had made, that it would alter things. And so she worked with this Washington State University professor, and they started this program back in the early 90s, I think it was. So it's been around for a long time. And that's exactly what I learned in this program was other-centeredness. I learned things like consistency. I learned that my dog was a mirror to me, and that because they're social animals, that if I were to be off, my dog would likely be off as well. If I was dysregulated, most likely my dog would be as well. And so it was like the key moment of learning that fake it till you make it actually does work, because if I could even just like hold the facade of calm, there was a much greater chance of my dog being calm. So I've jumped ahead a little bit. What I ended up getting out of this program was I worked training service dogs for people with mostly limited mobility disabilities. I also learned how to groom dogs, which is how I supported myself post-incarceration while I finished up my degree and then went on to get my master's degree. And I got to have all of the things that were missing in some way in my life. Yeah. This sense of responsibility, affection. I learned this really, really, really important thing, and that was about letting go and being brave enough to love again, because the dogs that you train in that program are not yours. And so everyone comes with a goal and an expiration date, but while they're in my care, they are going to be so fully mine, was my approach. And it worked really well. I found that I was really good at it, and I found purpose, and I found dignity, and I found all of these things through training dogs, and also just that connection.
Yeah, I mean, you make a really precious point, is this idea as a person who is filled, wherever the course of life had taken me, is that a big part of my story is loss, grief, and abandonment. Yeah. And, the thing of holding on tightly to things because they're mine, and the inability to let them go long after they're gone. And the teaching in what you talked about is loving with your whole self, even in the temporary, which is its own learning. I was on the opposite end of the spectrum when I left the institution and left you and went to the little institution over at Mission Creek. I also was in the prison pet project, and it was cats. Having a 6x9 with feral cats is its own interesting experience. But there is a preciousness when you wake up and you have kittens surrounding your head, and in a place where touch is illegal.
Yeah.
To be able to have connection and intimacy, love, and touch. With living things. It's a thing that you don't know. It's like that things that people take for granted is that you don't know what a pillow means, or a shower with no shoes, or touch of a living thing without consequence. And so, it's super tight points. So you had, I know that you've told this story before, but when we met, you had a dog named Harper.
Harper, yeah. Harper was the last dog that I trained in prison. I had to take a little break from the program. I had eventually qualified for extended family visits, trailer visits, where my dad would come and hang out in a little trailer with me for 48 hours. And my dad had been incarcerated in the 70s. And I think about that now, about like what cost to him and the willingness he had to come and spend 2 days locked inside an institution with me. How great a love is that, right? But my dad had come to visit me, and he brought all this wonderful food because there was a kitchen that I could cook in. And he brought this bread that was like so good that on the day that my trailer visit ended, I ate 3 slices of toast. And I did this without knowing that bread was full of poppy seeds. And so you do urinalysis as you go in, you do urinalysis as you come out, and I popped hot for opiates, which was huge insult to injury. I'd been working a program for a long time. I was super active in the recovery community, and I went to segregation for a dirty UA. And I didn't understand how that could happen. But again, if we think back to the requirements for working in that program, 2 years major infraction free. And so
everything was at risk.
Everything was at risk. And I appealed. I did all the things.
And it doesn't matter what you have done. I think it's really important to remember is that there is no agency. And by virtue of being in an institution, deems you untrustworthy.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the infraction stuck. I spent 10 days in segregation. I lost my room and my dog. I ended up in a dorm for the first time, and was back to square one. And I stayed not employed by that program for a year. And then they made an exception to policy and brought me back. And they did this about the same time that they were bringing in the first first litter of puppies to Prison Pet Partnership, we had always trained rescue dogs, which was so perfect, pulling dogs out of shelters and training them for a life of service. Something about that resonates so deeply with me. But not as deeply as a puppy. And so I came back to the program just as this litter of puppies was being awaited. This litter of puppies came from Nebraska. They were bred for service. They were black lab puppies. They were driven across country by Sister Pauline Quinn herself and her companion. They arrived at the institution. I didn't care which one I got. I wanted a girl, and I wanted to name her Harper. That's all I knew. I had the name picked out. We named our dogs based on influential women, and so Harper Lee was the inspiration for her name. And I also have an Atticus now and a Scout, just so you know. So the puppies arrived and they got distributed, and I ended up with the one with the red collar on because they were identical. You could only tell them apart by their collars. And Sister Pauline looked at me and she said, "Oh, you got the spirited one." And that turned out to be very true. Harper and I became this team that was unlike anything that I'd ever experienced before. There is a video out there on YouTube. If you look it up, Prison Pet Partnership, YouTube, whatever, I don't know the address, but it chronicles some of my process and relationship with Harper. By the time she was 4 months old, she had learned over 60 commands. She could do all of the things. She was destined for a beautiful life in service. The way that it works in the program is you keep them for about a year, and then they go out into the world to receive some other training, and then they come back for like their final training before being placed. And it just so aligned that Harper and I would be departing the institution at a similar time. She went a little bit ahead of me, and I had to say goodbye, right? We talked about that, about the power of that lesson of loving fully and saying goodbye. And it was really put to test with her. I had found even a greater and newfound sense of purpose in this dog, being able to raise her from infancy, being able to shape her, being able to kind of be your mom. I'll say it, you know, like that was a healing process, and saying goodbye was very difficult. But she had to do what she had to do, and I had to do what I had to do. And so a few months later, after saying goodbye to her, I went to a work release program, spent about 5 months there. When I got out, that also seemed to coincide with the time that Harper returned to the prison for her final training. And dogs who are going to serve, they need to be totally unflappable. And so they have to experience all kinds of environments. The environment that we train them in is not sufficient. That's right. And so I reached out to the program after I landed, after work release, and I began to act as a volunteer. And I would take Harper out for weekend adventures, and I would take her to the post office, and I would take her around with me. And it turns out that in that moment, she was of service to me. I had such crippling social anxiety when I released from prison. I was, I had so much shame about everything I didn't know how to do. I remember really distinctly going to the grocery store and trying to buy peanut butter, and standing in front of this massive aisle of 1,400 seemingly varieties of peanut butter, and not knowing which one I liked, and not knowing how to choose. And somebody bumped into me, and then the shame of like, why can't I choose peanut butter? It washed over me to the point where like I just left. I just gave up and left, and sat in the parking lot and just wept over my inadequacy.
Yeah, and it's an experience that people don't talk about is, you know, when you come from institution and whatever, before institution for many, but from institution in a place where there are very few choices that you ever make for yourself. Almost all choices are made for you.
Yeah.
And the thought is that when I get free, I'll be able to choose and not understand really what that means is to go from no choice to all of the choices. Can be crippling.
Yeah. Paralysis.
And, the thing internally, which, lived with me long before I ever ended up in an institution, is that there is this narrative that there's something wrong with me.
Absolutely.
And then I get free and it gets woken up.
Yeah.
This thing that I have longed for and that I may not be able to manage.
Yeah. Very well said. That was my experience as well. I felt like an alien in a foreign land. And so I do want to get to the end of this story, though.
Yeah. Yes. So Harper.
Yeah. So Harper. So I begin training Harper, and she in turn walks me through this transition. And then this thing happened where she really began to struggle with the transition back to the prison. And she would go back in and she would fail to perform. She would not accept cues. She started to become reactive. And that is definitely one thing that you cannot have in a service dog. She began to, if somebody came in a hat, she would bark and lunge, not in an aggressive way, but in a startled way and in a big way. She's a big black lab. And I saw that this was happening and I thought, surely they will understand that she's not meant for service. And so I began to get this little hope inside that Harper, who was my dog, would really end up being my dog. And the more I hoped, the less likely it seemed that would be realized. And so I began to give up hope. And eventually I got to the point where I had to step away. I could no longer endure that, nor could I subject Harper to that. In the interim, I start following this rescue online, and I come across this dog, Ernie. This guy is a big, goofy, white boxer, totally deaf. He's in this rescue for 2 years because he has a collapsed heart valve that needs to be replaced, and the rescue is raising enough money to get that done. Just about that time, I start seeing him. And so as a diversion from the heartache of losing hope that Harper and I would be together, I start knocking on the doors to see if Ernie, this boxer, might be my dog. And it turns out that they are. That's my method. I don't have a plan, right, for life. I just knock on all the doors, and if they open, I go through them. And so I knocked on the door, and it opened, and Ernie had his surgery, and then he recovered, and then I went and picked him up, and I brought him home, and he puked in my car the whole way home, and that's how we started. But he was just this magical dog. And 2 weeks after I brought him home, I got the call from Prison Pet Partnership that Harper was not going to become a service dog, and they wanted to give me the first opportunity to adopt her. The timing was terrible. I just adopted a high needs big
barely
dog.
Knew out of prison.
6 months out of prison in shared housing. And I'm like, of course I want her. And then I'm like, actually, I can't make decisions that way anymore. Can I have the weekend to think about it? And so I did. I didn't just think about it. I talked to everybody in my life that would be affected by it, and nobody told me no. And so I called them back on Monday because I knew that if I said no, I would regret it forever. And so Harper came home, and I am so happy to share that Ernie lived out the rest of his life with me. I just lost him about a month ago. And Harper and Ernie were the greatest pair ever. And she's at home waiting for me right now. Yeah.
Listen, my friend, I legit can talk to you all day long. I feel like we should talk about having you come back because there's so much more to this story
Yeah.
I mean, we've only just begun, but the magic of what it looks like to live a life that is guided by the unseen.
Yeah.
There is so much more magic. I mean, there is more to the story. There was an exception that was made for you to exit the prison to be a part of a dog show. I think we should talk about that. There is a story about the impact of education on your life and by proxy, the lives of the community. There is so much more to tell. And of course, we're at the end of what we have to talk today. So I am absolutely going to be inviting you back so that we can talk more about the story, your particular story of reentry and its impact on your life, on your family, and then on the greater community. Thank you, Melissa, for coming to spend time with me and talk about, these precious things.
Thank you, Carolyn. And just for the record, I will come anywhere you call me.
Listen, don't make me cry on this podcast because people can see me on video. Listen, I just want to make a couple of announcements before we close. Fam, we're going to ask everyone to join us on Sunday, September 14th, 2025, for a recovery day at T-Mobile Park. It's going to be a full day of celebrating hope and healing and the strength of recovery. The day is going to kick off at 9 a.m. at Occidental Square with a services fair, some wellness activities, a recovery rally, and more. We will march together to the stadium for the 1:10 p.m. Mariners game with a special first pitch, and there'll be a resource fair inside the park, and of course, you'll get your free Recovery Day t-shirt. I want to thank today the King County Behavioral Health and Recovery Division and the team at Orbit Studios for allowing us to be here and to make this whole thing possible, sharing stories of hope and healing and recovery. Thank you so much, Melissa, for being with me today.
Thank you.
I love you.
I love you.